So, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. This session today is brought to you by AWP's Innovative Thinking Group that's chaired by Johnsy, co-chaired by Chris. The members are Rachel, Joanna, Masher, Emily, Philmika, Erin, Rachel, and myself, two Rachels. And we talk a lot in the Innovative Thinking Group about different ways that we can be more, not only more efficient, but more creative in our work. And we've been talking a lot about how AI can help us do that. So at our last meeting, when we were going through it, we realized that our own use of AI is a little bit more advanced than using it for Google. A couple of people have begun to create agents, which we're not dealing with so much today. Maybe we will in a follow-up session. But really understanding how to use AI for decision making and productivity. And the first person to come to mind to me was Paige Durham. Paige Durham is retired from Germana. She was an instructional technologist there.
I was an instructional designer. Thank you very much.
What did I say?
A technologist.
Oh, no, instructional designer. That's exactly what I meant. Okay. And she's a specialist in many, many things, including teaching and learning, AI, and accessibility. And after Germana, she worked for the government and did really cool things with AI. And we're going to turn this over to her so she can share with us how we can be using AI.
Good morning. Sherry, can you turn off the ding dong, please? You turned off you did turn off the waiting room, but okay, so I am in a hotel in Arizona for the Quality Matters conference. So bear with me while I use my fancy portable multiple screens here this morning. So there we go. I think I am sharing the right screen. Yeah, there we go. All right. Let's see. Yep, that's not what I wanted. All right. I'm going to give up on the floating meeting bar. I give up. I can't make it work. So good morning, everyone. It's bright and early here. It's 9:30 there, but 7:30 here. And so I would love to talk to you all today about what currently is one of my biggest passions, and that's how to use AI appropriately. So we're going to explore two specific tools, Gemini and Copilot, to enhance decision making and productivity while maintaining high security standards, which we know is a problem. And not a problem, but is a consideration. And you'll have to, again, the coffee's kicking, so we'll get there. So this is an interesting intersection because we have workforce, we have industry, and we have academic. And then we also have policy. So we're constantly trying to figure out how to get this information in enrollment data, labor markets, labor trends, and we want to be able to get that information and then be able to use it quickly without spending days and weeks and trying to go through, a multi-sheet spreadsheet and have thousands of columns of information, and takes very long to synthesize. This is where AI can really be a great tool. So what can go in and what cannot? So with Gemini and Copilot, we know that Copilot is Microsoft's large language model, and Gemini is Google's large language model. And both of these we have access to, so we want to make sure that we are using them appropriately. They are closed systems, but we also still want to make sure that we don't put things in there that are not compliant. So we don't want to ever put student names, IDs, but we can always remove that information and not okay, I'm not even going to try to say it. Make it anonymous. There we go. I'll use that word because that one comes out. And then we could actually still use these tools. It also, we can't put any kind of personnel information or contracts or budgets. And so those are the kind of things that we don't want to put in. But we can also we can use it for lots of great things. For example, we can use it for reviewing enrollment trends and all these kinds of things. So it's just this is kind of just a what to consider before. And the easiest way that I think about this is if you aren't willing to publicly put it on the internet, then you should not put it into a large language model. And I mean like public Facebook so that the whole world can see it. If you don't want to post it on Facebook, you know, for everybody on a public, then do not put it in generative AI. That's a much easier rule and a lot fewer words too. So the tool landscape. So what's good for what? That's always a question that I get a lot whenever I am doing any kind of workshop is I don't know what tool to use for this, that, and the other. And, you know, how do I know which one to use? So if you're looking at Gemini is great for more verbal kind of responses. It does pretty well, excuse me, with analysis of spreadsheets as well, but it is great for research and for drafting. But you will also find that Copilot is excellent for Excel analysis. It's okay for drafting email. And you can also find Copilot inside of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel. Please be cautious, though. Those tools do not often work as well for whatever reason as if you I don't know why that's highlighted, as if you just straight use the tools like Copilot and then you put your spreadsheet in rather than being in a spreadsheet and then opening a sidebar. I'm not really sure why that is. That's just something to consider. But there are also two other tools that I would like to mention because these may be options for you if you are using just doing something that's personal or if you need something and you just want to brainstorm. So Claude and ChatGPT are the two that I'm going to recommend for those kinds of things. So it's a great place to start if you're not sure you know, what you want to talk about or how you want to use AI, but you certainly can use ChatGPT and Claude. Now, both of them have free versions, and you will note, however, when those free versions, they do have it's oftentimes a time limit or a number of character limit. So you'll get to the conversation, then it'll give you a very nice message of, you've run out of free things for today. Come back and they'll tell you like at 4 p.m. or something, or 2 p.m. It's really good about telling you when you can come back to play. So don't think that ChatGPT and Claude are not available for use. They are. It's just you need to consider and exactly what you're going to put into those two tools. Claude, by the way, is my personal favorite, but that's just me. All right. So you can see at very simple, we're going to do this in just a minute, analyze this quarterly enrollment data and identify the top 3 trends by region. So let me go, oh, my earpiece is falling out. If you all have questions, please feel free to unmute and ask while I'm doing all these fandangled things, because I prefer to have a conversation. Oh, look. Oh, I'm like, what's Sherry putting in the chat? All right. That's not the one I want.
Ignore just editorial comment.
Okay. You should be looking at Copilot now. I'll try to make this just a little bit bigger. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload a document. And this is all fake data. So Well, I might be not uploading anything. There we go. It's not, hold on one second. The hotel Wi-Fi is a little sketchy. All this ready, and it was ready, and then it disappeared. All right, let me, 1 second. When in doubt, go back, find it somewhere else. So this spreadsheet has 3 tabs and a lot of information. I think you're still looking at, there we go. So it's obviously it's called fake business data. And I'm going to ask it to analyze the information in the sales spreadsheet. Please analyze. And I also apologize for typing really slow, but I managed to nick my finger this morning, and it's triple band-aided. So it's a little hard to feel the key there. So you can see that very quickly was able to go through the spreadsheet and pull out the sales data. Sales by region, by revenue, expenses. So the 3 tabs were sales data, expenses, and customer details. But let me also show you the spreadsheet itself. So you should see this crazy spreadsheet that has a ton of information. Each of these sheets would take, yeah, you could absolutely do this with, some formulas and things like that. But you can see that Copilot gave me a very, very fast response rather than me sitting there and trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to pull out of the first sheet? What do I want to pull out of the second sheet? And if I go back to Copilot, now you can see that I have all of these. It also gave me some customer insights by industry. And then it says, would you like a visual breakdown of sales by region? And I'm going to say yes. So it's going to provide me a chart that I can use.
And imagine how long it would have taken us if we had done this by hand inside of Excel.
So now you see that I have a chart, and then there's also the option to download. So I can download this, and it's going to download it as a PNG, as an image. So that's just something to keep in mind, that when it creates a chart for you, you can take that down, and then you can use it in any kind of a document. You can also, while you're here, and since I'll put on my other accessibility hat, you could ask it to generate alt text for this chart so that when you added that chart to wherever you were putting it, you would automatically have the alt text. And here you can see it gives you a breakdown of exactly what's in the chart. So that's just a thinking in terms of taking a very multi-sheet spreadsheet and getting it to provide you some analysis. Now let's go to Gemini. And I say that, and I gotta find it. And I'm going to just highlight and copy and paste the prompt I had. Ask me questions. I have started to add in, if I have prompts that are kind of generic or so, I'll add the AI to tell me what it needs from me, like more questions. So I ask me more questions is what I added to the end of that prompt to get some more information. So I didn't give it a, so I'll say 60 minutes. IT computer. And CompTIA. And Gemini speaks very friendly to me, which is why, you know, this is excellent. So it you know, kind of pats you on the back. It's always nice to have a little affirmation. And then you can see this, because of what I have done in the past, it still remembers learning games and gamification, instructional design. So it's going to add those things in. But whatever you use it for, it's going to remember what you do, and then it's going to apply those things to your specific requests. So college cybersecurity credentials, that's a mouthful right there. Meeting agenda. So it's telling, you know, alignment and stacking of cybersecurity. And it gives you, here is your, and notice that it even gives you a time setting. And then if I could have told it that it started at 1 o'clock or 9 a.m. or whatever, but it's this way, you're going to be able to kind of have an idea from here. Now, I could take this and move it one step further and ask it to break it down into a presentation outline based on the agenda. So now I'm also starting to get into what is this going to be, you know, how am I going to present this information? So you can see it does very well with giving you kind of ideas. And then there's a little wrap up. And then it always asks at the end, would you like a quick memo template to summarize the action items? And I'm going to tell it, no, please. Oh, no, I'm going to not type anything. Please provide me with a presentation out to accompany. So the reason that I asked to give it slide title and content only is oftentimes if we just want to copy and paste and then create this in a different, either in PowerPoint or whatever your presentation platform that you prefer is that sometimes it will put in speaker notes, or it will put in visual suggested simulations, or many different things. But when you're doing that, you want to keep in mind that that makes it really difficult to kind of get to the actual presentation. I can always go back and ask for those things, but if I want to just be able to copy and paste this and create something with it, then I don't want to have to remove the speaker notes and the visual suggestions and all of that when I'm trying to create this presentation. So here we have the title, the subtitle, the goal, and it even gives you, you know, what slide number it is, the title. Now I could take this entire thing and copy it and create an entire presentation from this. Now you could do this, again, you could do it in PowerPoint, you could do it in Gamma app, you could do it in several different presentation platforms, but this is, now you have an entire presentation that you can create really quickly based on this. So you can use just the copy response and then put that into something else. And I'm going to show you an example of something that does make presentations pretty quickly. Let me go to, now because this is a presentation, I'm going to use Gamma app. Gamma has a free version, but this is the paid version because I use it often. So I just copied and pasted straight from Gemini into Gamma, and then I'm just going to delete out a little bit of this. And in Gamma, if we want different slides, we do have to put these little dashes in order to tell it to make a new slide. Well, what's nice about this is you can then convert it to PowerPoint once you've gotten it into Gamma. So you can download this as a PowerPoint, and that will allow you to continue to manipulate within Gamma and edit. So I'm going to tell it to preserve the, actually, no, I'll let it concise. I'm going to let it build out a little bit more content for these. And you can, over in the left, you see it says write for. This is who it's going to be for, the tone. I'm going to leave it at the default visual. It's going to create 12 cards, and I'm just going to choose the generate button.
Paige, will you be able to edit these slides where either something is not quite accurate or you want to add or delete something?
Yeah, as soon as it's done, I can't really, I don't like to mess with it while it's doing all of its
I'm
pretty
just
stuff.
asking if it was possible. Okay.
Yeah, so just it's almost done. All right, now it's done. So let me scroll back up to the top because I don't know if anybody can read that fast. I know I can't. So at this point, I can look here. I could make any, put my cursor in, change it. I can click here. I could decide that I want this to say VCCS logo. I have no idea what's going to make, but we're going to try it and leave it at generate. Well, that's a new VCCS logo. But anyway, so you can notice here that I could have added an image. If I had one, I could use, I have all of these different things to choose from. Or or I could just leave it as the theme card. You can you can change the card order around. So I put the picture on the other side. You can click in here, and over here on the right hand side, you have all of these basic blocks that you could add in a table. You have images, you have smart layouts. These are all different kinds of things like your bullets or your sequencing or timeline. You also have these new smart diagrams. You could create like different things that are very visual. You can put in column charts, bar graphs, pie charts, any kind of thing. You can put in videos. You can also embed web pages or social media. All of that can be put in here, and then and then you have the ability to share this as a live link, but you can also export as PowerPoint or Google Slides or a PDF. But I will tell you, if you do the PDF, it will not be accessible. So I would export to PowerPoint, and then you would have you can still edit and manipulate as well. So you can see any of these blocks are editable, doesn't matter where you are. You can change the images. But this is a much faster way to get to a presentation than starting from scratch. And all I did was start with an outline. So thinking with AI means that we're using it as our assistant, but we are still the human who is driving whatever we're doing with the tool. We are the subject matter experts. We understand what we want it to say and want it to do. And so this is how we can get to a finished product much faster. All right, I'm going to go back to my presentation. And now I want to talk about doing a SWOT analysis with AI. So I'm going to use the prompt that you see here. Oh, maybe I'm not. There we go. And I'm going to go back to Gemini. And I'm actually going to start a new chat. I'm back. I think you lost me. I think I disappeared.
Yes, you need to share again.
Okay, yeah, well, it's still loading, so I can't. I actually am going to turn off my camera in hopes that that helps.
Hey, Paige, while you're waiting for that to load, I have a question.
Fire away.
So this is going to expose my ignorance, but so I was taking a two-part training on Copilot, how to use Copilot ethically and all that. And it asked us to use our credentials to log into Copilot, our institutional credentials. And I couldn't do that. And I don't know if if I have to have some kind of an account. I'm just wondering if you can provide some guidance.
So go ahead, Sherry.
Oh, I was going to say, let's take that question to ITS and see how they've got us set up. I think the issue is that while Copilot and Gemini are in protected environments at the VCCS, therefore we should have to use our @email.vccs.edu to get in. We're still using the free version.
But I think, Sherry, Copilot does not use your VCCS. It uses your vccs.edu email, or my Germana email. Yeah. So Copilot doesn't because it's is associated with your Microsoft account. Right. Gemini is associated with your student account. Yeah. So Chris, what I think the issue is probably that you would have had to go, you could have gotten to it by going to Microsoft 365 and then logging into your VCCS account and then choosing the Copilot app. That's what I think you would have to do in order to get to that version. Is you would have had to go to Office 365 first, because Copilot as an app on my computer is attached to my Microsoft personal account. That's not, if that makes any sense.
It does.
Yeah. Okay.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So here, let's try this again since the internet went down. And just for more fun, when I got to the hotel on Sunday, the power went out for 5 hours. And they couldn't check you into the hotel room, and you couldn't do anything. And it was a lovely little adventure that I've been on since Sunday. So I'm not surprised that the internet just went down. So now it's giving me the SWOT analysis. I won't scroll too fast. Now I can share this as a sheet. I could export that entire table as a sheet, a Google sheet, and then obviously you would be able to manipulate it as well. And then it also gives me a little takeaway. So it also, again, it always asks kind of a follow-up question. So do you want to continue the conversation? And yes, you generally do want to continue the conversation. You do want to iterate, you do want to refine, and you do want to tell it if it did a good job or not. So AI this is providing, a structured framework. It's also, if I wanted to, I could ask it to provide the research. I could tell it to give me multiple perspectives. And then it would also, if I wanted to, I could say, give me a starting point for a discussion with and you would tell it what group of people you were going to have that discussion with. Sorry. So this is where, you come in. This is it is a conversation starter, but you can refine it based on actual college capabilities and strengths. You can, decide whether or not, it's your assistant and it's not your strategist. So it's helping give you the information to get you started, but it's not really strategizing what to do with the information. It's giving it to you because that's what it's good at. So I could say provide some research. So here we have what the source is, and then we could make determinations whether or not these are appropriate. And there are a couple other things. You can create something inside of Gemini called a GEM, not a JIM, or GYM. So it is, with a GEM, what you can do is you can put in lots of information that are your own documents, and then you can start asking questions of those documents, which will allow it to give you a much more refined answer. So you can see it even cited Withville in here. Weaknesses. So it's telling you where it pulled its information from. So hopefully that kind of gave you an idea of a different way that you could use Gemini for that kind of thing. So now I'm going to go to my friend Claude, and he's going to ask me, obviously, would I like coffee this morning? And I'm going to ask it to create a pestle analysis. I'll let you see the prompt. Trending Impact Virginia Advancement and focus on CTE. Align this with the VR community college system. I'll just say that. We'll see what happens. So Claude does a really good job with academic things. It writes very, very well. And it will give you a lot of really good information. Now, I didn't put anything in there that was obviously PII or any kind of personal. I'm just asking it to give me some information. It also, if you notice here in the center, is telling me exactly where it's pulling things from. And it writes really fast. So AI excels at synthesizing across multiple domains. So never, we're not putting anything in here, but AI can scan the horizon based on public information and then overlay our institutional intelligence. So then we can take those two things. And so it's scanning accelerated so that we get all of this information in a much better way, in a much faster way, so that we can actually use it. Now, obviously, like I said, Claude gives you a very detailed report most of the time. You can also create projects in Claude, and I'll show you an example of that in just a minute. As soon as he's done all of what he's doing. Let's see if I can't make this bigger too. That should help. Interesting that it mentioned robots after 2 days ago, they came out with an AI robot. I don't know if anybody saw it. I'm just talking while this is still thinking. That you can purchase on a monthly subscription. It's 5'6" tall. It will fold your clothes and put your do your dishes, and you can make it have different voices and give it a name, or you can buy it outright for like, I don't think it's like $30,000. But yes, so there's a new AI robot that really does do the things that we really wish we had somebody to do them for us. Hmm.
Right. I'm trying to figure out how long it would have taken me to go through those websites and other resources to get 1/10 of the information it's pulling out here.
Yeah, and I didn't realize it was going to take quite this long, but it's
Yeah, but look
evidently.
how much it's taking out.
Yeah. Now, I also should be able to share out. You can also share this chat from Claude.
While it's doing it, Paige, do you have a resource for us that has a guideline of what AI tool is good to use for what, along the lines of what you did in the very beginning, but maybe with some more detail?
Maybe.
Okay, we'll follow up with you on it.
Nope, hold on. You just had to let me get to the right window. I think this is what you're looking for. Rachel, please let me know if that's what you were looking for. Okay. And then it gives me a lovely summary. It also gives me all of the information. Notice here on the right-hand side, I have two options. So I can copy this as it is. I could download it as a PDF, or I could publish it and then share it out. If I download this, I believe it saves it as a Word doc. But also at the top, if I wanted to copy just the code, I could have. So you do have some options within Claude, and then you can do that. So I'm going to choose download. No, it's actually going to download it as a different file type. So I'm not going to worry about that. But if I wanted to publish this, it is now, notice that it gives me a warning. Anyone on the web with the link can view the artifact, but my chat will remain private. So since I am in a place where I know that, and this was just a sample, I'm going to go ahead and put that in the chat. So now you can get to that chat to take a look at it as well. So while we are, taking a look and thinking about what can we use AI for and what's the best use of AI, AI is a sandbox. So think about it as a place that you can go. And I really, really think and still believe, we learn best through play. And it is a safe environment if we consider playing when we're using AI. So we want to think about using it as our sandbox. So we're going to roll out something and we want to draft some documentation. We could ask it to look at the information in that and identify potential gaps, different approaches, and then it's a low risk kind of place to experiment. If the AI generated framework doesn't work, you haven't really done anything and you haven't committed any resources, you haven't spent any money. You literally used it as a play, a sandbox to play in. Once you've refined it, then you can think about, implementing it, and it reduces the risk. So but it allows also increases buy-in because we've kind of used it as a place to do a lot of what if analysis. If we wanted to put something in and say, okay, this is what I'm looking at, provide me a risk assessment, give me some ideas where there might be problems, and also provide me with possible solutions to avoid those risks or problems when we are, excuse me, when we are beginning this. So if there's a new dual enrollment yep, let me try that again. Dual enrollment communication protocol would be another, that's a way that we could think about how can we do that. We could also think about what's the best way to collect information, or how can we could say things like, we have the following tools. Do we have any tools that overlap? If we do, how do they overlap? Can you give me an idea of what's the best tool that we have for X project or X thing that I want to do? So asking the AI in those kinds of situations really kind of helps guide us and pivot us to the direction that we need to go, rather than, just kind of willy-nilly guessing it and figuring, well, this is the tool we have always used for this, so it must be the right one. Well, that may not necessarily be the case. So tools are only secure as how we use them. Gemini and Copilot have robust security when you use your accounts from work. But security isn't all about the tool, it's about the user behavior. So it is making things automatic and thinking, is this something that I want to post on the internet everywhere? If that's okay, then that would be okay to go into AI. But if there's ever a yes, if it contains sensitive information, then it should not go into AI. So, are we, taking the steps to make sure that we are using an AI the correct way and keeping our data private? So transparency is something that this is actually was a topic of conversation at this conference that we were at, and regards to faculty using AI and how they're being transparent about it, how are they being, and how are administrators being transparent about what is being used. So there are some transparency statements that I have given you samples of at the end of this presentation, so that you kind of have an idea or a starting place. So it's not about apologizing for using AI, but it is about building trust. So when you are using AI to help draft a communication, you are telling people by putting in a transparency statement that you are AI literate and that you are using a tool responsibly. But you may want to think about kind of getting together a document that decides on these following documents. Now, I also want to put a caveat in here to say that when we are talking about a transparency statement, be very careful not to overdo the transparency. In the very brief period I was at the government, there was an entire conversation about having to label every single item in a course with an AI transparency statement. That means every image, every paragraph. And I was like, are you all crazy? I'm like, you're going to look, that's going to be a cluttered mess. Nobody's ever going to look at it. All they're going to see are all this stuff, and they're not actually going to see the content. I was like, why not use a overarching transparency statement that says, I used generative AI was used to create the following materials in this course. These are the large language models that were used, and these are the ways that they were used, and put that single statement somewhere, like at the end of the course or the beginning of the course. And they were like, wow, that's so smart. And I was like, well, I might have done this a time or two. But I just, felt like the transparency is important, but it's also important where you put it and how it is viewed by the user. You don't want to clutter up your information with all of these little little footnotes. AI assisted, human driven. That's the kind of motto of my business that I started. AI it's augmented intelligence. So it's not about replacing any humans. It's about empowering you to work more efficiently, to be more creative, and to get, a time back. So, but we also have to know that our role at the end of whatever the response we get is, when we choose to put it out there, we know that we have taken our time, we've made some edits, we've corrected it, we've fact checked it, and we've done all of those things so that we do it in an appropriate way. So AI supports judgment. It does not replace it. And UNESCO just came out with a whole bunch of human-centered AI standards. So here are some quick wins starting tomorrow. So think of one thing that is normally takes you a lot of time, and use Gemini and start trying to think about, how can I use Gemini to save me some time? Use Copilot to summarize some data. Do one thing in one AI. Now, I'm also going to say that AI is a mirror. Whatever you put into it is what you're going to get back from it. And also, using it daily is going to also help build your literacy, but we don't want to be tool agnostic. Being tool agnostic is not helpful in learning and being AI literate, because we need to be able to understand all of the tools that are out there. We may not necessarily be able to use them for all of the things in our job, but we do need to understand what's out there and how we can use them. So AI should be a part of our normal way that we work. It's not scary. It's not futuristic. It's here. And we also have to remember that AI is the worst it's ever going to be today, and it's only going to get better from here on out. So, and as I have been playing and doing AI for the past 2 years, I will tell you it's remarkable what has happened. So before we get to some Q&A, I want to show you a few things that are here. My contact information. It's not like y'all don't know how to find me. I'm going to be forever in the VCCS. I just don't know that I retired and now I'm back, and I'm thinking, am I going to retire again? I don't know. So here are some transparencies, ideas, some statements, when to use, when not to use. And then I gave you very specific things. So there's some for your email. You can add it as a PS if you wanted to. Here are some documency transparency statements, just depending upon how you're using them. Again, it's a statement, not a footnote at every single little item that you may have used for AI. And I also like to go back and forth between AI and use Gemini and Copilot with the same prompt, and then compare the two responses and pull the best from both of them to create a much better response or a better answer. This is another one for a planning document. And then these are some FAQs. So I want to give you, there are some resources that I created. If I can get there. There is a prompt template library. Let's see if I can get to that. So you will have access to this. I'm going to give you this. So these are some prompts that you can use, literally copy and paste. And you can see meeting preparation, data analysis, communication, strategic planning, research and synthesis. So these are just prompts that get you started without you having to think, I don't know how to write a prompt, or I'm not sure what I should put in the prompt. But this gives you something that you can copy and paste, edit, and start immediately. I also created, the transparency statements are in the document, and a security checklist. So before using any AI tool, kind of think about what can you put in and what you should not. So that's kind of, and then there are some tool specific guidelines. And that's what I got. So anybody have any questions? And let me get the link to this to share in the chat. All right. Sherry said save time because y'all were going to have questions. So I saved time. Otherwise, I could talk for the full, 60 minutes. Yes, Emily, that link I just put in there is the presentation. You should just be able to click on it and it should take you right there.
Yeah, and tomorrow we will send you the recording as well.
And I want to go back.
All the documents and slides that are shared today, I'm hoping to be able to put those in a central location for all of us to access. I think the innovative thinking group already has like a Google Drive and a space for sharing documents. So we will probably leverage that to share that with broader audience. So Paige, I'll probably connect with you to get some of those documents that can be shared with. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yep, absolutely. And I did want to show you what projects were, because that's something that I have been using a lot in Claude. So if I go to my projects, for example, and this one is, I've got all of my accessibility information, and then I can ask it questions based on whatever it is I want to do. I can put in my, I'll show you the files. So you can see over here on the right, these are all the files I added to the project. So this is all of the information that I have used to create and work on and update my website information, as well as any of the presentations that I'm doing and anything else that comes out. So you also have I can put in specific instructions to tell Claude in a specific way to respond. So ChatGPT also has projects. Gemini's quote projects are called gems, but this is a way for you to load up lots of things to be able to ask it questions based on whatever it is, whether it's a document, a presentation, an image. All of those things can be loaded into your project files, and then that information uses the project information first before it gives you anything else that's outside of that.
Paige, do you use agents? Although it seems to me projects works better the way my mind works, but do you use AI agents?
Agents are a little bit different. So agents are for automating tasks. So like if you wanted to create an agent to automate, for example, I did find one that will, you can put in a silent video and it will pull the action that's going on in there. So it's an automated thing. But you can build your own agents. You can have them do anything for email responses to it, not with for work, but if you're building agents personally, you can, they're a lot of it's an automation. But for project files, that's more of a conversation. It's like, you know, when you're doing a research paper, you had all of your books. So think of that's your more your project, rather than an agent.
Is there a storage limitation to what, like, are you using a paid version?
Yeah, I am. All of mine are paid. Yeah.
Okay.
Gemini, well, no, my Gemini is paid too. That wasn't my VCCS Gemini.
Other questions, comments for Paige?
Yeah, I've got a question for Paige. Wonderful presentation.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Dan's gonna ask you.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I'm using Copilot for spreadsheets and analyzing data and such, how do I mean, do I need to be concerned about misinterpretations of the data by AI? Do I just not look at that, include the statement that this is, you know, AI generated? I just was kind of curious about that.
So are you talking about a transparency statement when you're analyzing a spreadsheet?
Yeah, well, I just if I create, you know, I get this analysis done of a spreadsheet and the trends and such. Do I check behind it, or do I just focus on my transparency statement? I just was kind of just wondering, are there, because you hear, well, AI is not perfect, and I just wanted to just get a sense of just what the practices are. And
so you're always responsible for whatever you choose to do with the AI. So you're always going to check it. But you're also going to be transparent that you got to that end result much faster because you had a collaborative AI partner that helps you get to that finish line a lot faster. And that's the difference, is using it in a way that gets us to the finish line in a much more efficient way, because there is so much that it's super time consuming. But why are we going to not use the tool? It's much better to use the tool, check the tool, and then get to the finish line than say, I'm not going to use the tool because I don't know if it's going to be accurate or not. I will say they've all gotten much better in the past probably 10 months, and not giving such incorrect information. But you can still cause your AI to like wig out if you ask it something it's not supposed to answer, and then you keep pushing it, and then you copy and paste the response it gives you back and say, why did you tell me that I should shoot nuclear weapons at the sun? And then it will eventually, you'll get into the code. You can actually break it. So there are some things that we just have to be conscious of, but it's the human driving the boat. It's not AI driving us, but we're driving the boat and then deciding where we're going to steer and how we're going to use the information.
Yeah, and to add to that, Paige, I think most of this comes from experience in using with the tool, right? Like,
correct.
you will very quickly notice when you're analyzing data, there are a few things that are pretty straightforward. You're asking it to give you an average of 10 numbers. You don't even have to go back and check whether it's done it correctly or not. But when there's some complex analysis you're doing based on certain definitions that are within the VCCS domain, and you're trying to do some comparisons, you may want to go back and check on what it's giving you and see if it has picked up the context that you've given it correctly, right? But as you keep doing that more and more, you will know which pieces you really want to go back and check on. You don't have to check the entire document, but you'll know which ones are critical that you actually go check.
So I just put in the chat. Sherry was asking about agents, and that's kind of a marketplace. So you can kind of see what other people, if that's just for exploration. I'm not telling you to use any of them, but if you want to know what other people are creating and what agents do, that's a great place to take a look, because there's just, there's a ton, and a lot of them are free. A lot of them are like $1.99. But again, you know, it's a good place to kind of start the beginning to understand what is an AI agent and how people are building and using them.
We're at the bottom of the hour, and does anybody have any last questions for Paige? Paige has a VCCS email because she can't really leave us. So it's pdurham@vccs.edu. Please feel free to ask her questions, and the thinking group that's chaired by Chauncey will continue to explore issues not only in AI, but in lots of tools and also in design thinking, and share that out with AWP to help us move ahead. Chauncey, since this is your group, did you want any closing words as we make our way out?
Well, just thank you. Thank you so much, Paige, for pulling this together. I know a lot of us are at different spaces when it comes to AI. We have those superstars that are in there. We have those very cautious, cautiously optimistic people who are still trying to figure out what to use and what not to use. So this session has been really, really helpful, and I can't wait to get my hands on some of the documents that you have shared, because I'm sure those will be really, really helpful for, not just AWP, but System Office in general, as we continue to have these conversations. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yep, I wanted to thank you as well, Paige. Thanks for presenting to us today.
Yep, you're very welcome. My pleasure, all the way from Arizona. What's the weather there? It's 86 here, by the way.
Oh yeah, rub it in. But we're not doing bad. I think we're going to hit the 70 today. So
yeah.
It's 59 right now. We're supposed to get to 72 today.
Yeah.
Oh, 72. I'll be home at midnight tonight. So
it will not be 72.
No, I know.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.